Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Home Expo Podcast, where we bring trusted home improvement specialists and homeowners together. My name is Tammie Hartman, and I am your host. Today, we're exploring how tiny homes and accessory dwelling units are transforming what's possible for sustainable, affordable living. Our guest is Vina Lustado, a social entrepreneur and founder of Soul House Design, who has built her own off-grid tiny house and advocates for human-centered design. Vina is the founder and owner of Soul House Design, a boutique design firm in Ojai, California. Born in the Philippines and raised in Los Angeles, she earned her architecture degree from the University of Southern California and spent over 2 decades working for high-profile architecture firms before charting her own path. Vina established Soul House Design in 2010 to provide sustainable and affordable housing solutions. In 2013, she designed and built a 140 square foot tiny home on wheels, which she still calls home. Her work has been featured in books, television, and conferences, and she has been honored among the FWN Global 100 Most Influential Filipino Women, that was a mouthful, for her social entrepreneurship and commitment to eco-conscious design. Vina, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to hear more about how you're helping with regulations in getting more and more spaces regulated for people to have tiny homes. I think that a lot of people are kind of downsizing and decluttering, and they don't really need these 3,000 square foot homes anymore, you know? I mean, that's just too much space. So we wanted to talk to you about some off-grid living and minimalism. I know that some people worried about like solar. Or, do I have enough water? Do I have enough clothes? Is there enough for, snacks in the drawer? What are the benefits and some of the challenges of living simply, like from generating power, like I mentioned, solar panels, and kind of creating multifunctional spaces? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Tammie. And I wanted to thank you for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. That was
Yeah.
quite an introduction. So thank you.
Mhm.
So the tiny house living with, you know, my square footage of my tiny house is 8.5 feet wide by 20 feet long. And so that on the first level is about 140 square feet. I do have a loft space above. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
my sleeping quarters. So that doesn't include the loft space, which is about 10 feet long as opposed to 20 feet long. But I would say when I moved in for the first time, I thought that it was going to be a little bit of a sacrifice having to minimize all my belongings into such a teeny tiny space.
Mhm.
But I realized soon after I moved in, it really wasn't that difficult.
Mhm.
It made me like, if you look at your closet, a
Mhm.
lot of the items in there you don't really wear regularly.
That's
So, it's easier to make decisions about what to wear, for instance, and what to put in the tiny refrigerator is easier because, for instance, I didn't have a freezer. I only had a refrigerator. So I tended to be more healthy because I couldn't purchase things like ice cream. So that was a big deal. But I was pretty specific about what I could eat. And the cooking utensils obviously have to be multifunctional, along with
right.
everything else, like the furnishings and even your clothing. So if you're able to design your life around that, and I do this for my clients to be able to maximize their efficiency within their space so that the great room is also a dining room, is also your living room, your office,
Mhm.
um, and
Guest
there were. I'm sorry.
your guest room.
Your guest room, yeah, it was because I had a sofa that was also a storage unit and also was a guest um, sleeping area. So
Uh-huh.
it definitely maximizes if you have your multifunctionality in your furniture.
And you also
Um,
get to have your all your favorite things, like your favorite pair of jeans or your favorite, yogurt that you like to eat, your favorite blanket to sit on the couch. So it's kind of like you get to have all of your favorite things.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so when I purchase something, I have to really think about it. So even after thinking about it for like several weeks before I purchase it, and when I finally purchase it after, really committing to buying something, many times I wind up returning it anyway because it just doesn't fit many of my needs, and I wind up not liking it, loving it as much as I thought.
Mhm.
So a lot has to be intentional. And I would say after living it in a few months, it wasn't that difficult to not feel a sacrifice at all. In fact, the rewards that you get with living tiny, with being able to save so much money and being able to kind of be out in the community more, and enjoying the outdoor space more, and just knowing that you're not having to have a large footprint on the earth was definitely a plus for me. So there's a lot of benefits that people don't realize. I didn't realize until after I lived in it for many years. So I think you don't concentrate so much on the sacrifice as much as the rewards.
And I know that it doesn't obviously it doesn't cost as much either to heat it up or cool it down. You're probably not using as much water. So, what about generating power? How does that affect your space?
So a lot of people think that solar panels is easy to incorporate in your tiny house, but there's a couple of things to consider. One is if you're using heating as an electrical piece, that takes a lot of load. So that means your solar panel has to be increased in the capacity of
Mm,
what it can handle. So, like even a toaster or hair dryer or a heater takes up a lot of load. So, if you're wanting to be on solar, you're going to have to really increase the capacity of the kilowatts on your panels. So that could be a driver in terms of your budget.
mhm,
But if you're not off grid, I was using propane wood stove. It's not actual wood, but it was a propane stove. So
mhm,
that was my source of heating. And of course, it's not that expensive because I just use a small, I think it's 8-gallon tank like you would use at a barbecue grill.
mhm,
And I just have to refill that every so often, especially during the winter. So that isn't really such a big cost amount. And yeah, the electricity, and if you kind of switch out your maybe refrigerator to a propane
mhm,
gas
mhm.
type of refrigerator, that would definitely decrease your usage for the solar panels.
That's
Um, so those are things to consider to be off grid, and that it's an additional cost to
mhm.
be off grid on solar after you've completely done the construction of your tiny home. So you have to consider that as an additional part of your budget.
Yikes. Well, everything costs something, right?
Well, in the long term, it's a saving. So it's something that you have to kind of balance on your own.
It's an investment.
Exactly. You just don't pay as much,
Mhm.
after a few years, it would be zero.
Oh, zero is always good. Um, so what about prefabricated ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and the Soul Pod? How is a modular and fire resistant tiny homes, how can they address like wildfire risk and housing shortages? And what are the key design elements that make them resilient?
So, an iteration that I came up with for the tiny house to make it more easily permitted and constructed is the prefab modular
Okay.
solution that I did for one client here in Ventura County. It was the size of, 26 feet by 10 feet, so it's slightly larger.
Okay.
Um, and the benefit of that is while it's a permitted structure, because when you have a modular unit, it has to be permitted with the state of California instead of the local jurisdiction because it's done in a factory. So the benefit of doing it as a modular unit permitted as within the state is that you have a parallel process. So you could do the permitting for the local jurisdiction for your foundation and the site work while they're actually building the unit, the ADU or the dwelling in a factory, so that if there's inclement weather, for instance, you can build your structure in the factory while it's raining or snowing or whatnot, something that you would not normally do on the site. And so it only takes one day to bring the unit to the job site. I mean,
Right,
it
like a
shouldn't,
crane.
like a crane, exactly. And if you started early in the morning, they're usually able to finish installing it at the site, with the condition that the foundation is already completed and ready to go to hook up to the utilities. And that typically needs to be done anyway for permitting process.
Right.
So you reduce the time considerably. So that's a cost savings. But I do have to say that when you do multiple builds, when you have an economy of scale, like development of a community, that's when you really have a cost savings for doing modular tiny houses in a factory. But after, if you do a more customized version of one single tiny house, then I found that it's actually not a cost savings to do it as a modular unit because it's a custom build and you get the savings of a prefabricated modular build only if you have the economy of scale.
Right.
So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And I think that with the prefab modular homes, those plans are already permitted.
In place. There,
Right.
yeah,
So you
exactly.
you don't have to say, "Oh, but I want my kitchen over here." Well, you can't have it over there. You have to have it over here. Whereas,
Because they would have to re-engineer it, and
yeah,
so it's not as efficient because it's essentially a custom build.
and the cost for architecture, for an
Yeah, as an additional to have to revise the layout and the design, and then the structural engineer has to be,
and
yeah, so it's like another custom build, so you're kind of losing the efficiency. But regarding your question on the resistance for fire, for permitting requirements, mostly here in California, it's a high fire hazard zone. There's rarely any jurisdictions in California that I know that doesn't have a high fire zone. So what they require typically on exterior building materials is that it's 1 hour Class A rated, so that it takes like an hour for a fire to start getting into the material. So, for instance, they don't really allow wood framing unless it's a thick 4x6, 4x8 construction, because a 2x framing would burn too easily.
right.
So, they don't typically allow wood. They prefer like cement board siding, for instance, by Hardy panel, because that's cement board, which takes a lot longer to burn. And for metal, for the roofing, I prefer metal roofing because that's the most durable in terms of fire resistance, and also the the venting is really what's the most vulnerable in terms of starting a fire. When
Right.
you have venting in the attic space, because the embers and fire starts in the air when there's a lot of wind occurring during that day, the
Right.
embers will fly into the vents quickly, and so it'll get inside the house quickly before most of the time when it starts in the ground, because most fires start in the air and the roof. So that's why I think metal roofs are better than the like asphalt composition roof.
Yeah, I think that more and more companies might be heading towards that, especially with, California basically being a fire zone. It
Yep.
doesn't matter where you live, whether it's in Los Angeles or Sacramento. I mean, all of California is a fire zone. So I think maybe more and more modular homes and tiny homes are going to go for the metal roofs rather than tile or other materials. You think?
I know it's good because during transport, it's the least weight metal roof
Oh, okay.
versus like tile and even asphalt composition. But
Mhm.
even the projects that I have that are site built, traditional stick built on foundation without
Mhm.
being built in the factory, I always specify they will require the same fire class A, roofing, whether or not it's modular or site built,
Mhm.
because they need to comply to the same fire code in
Mhm.
that jurisdiction, regardless of whether or not it's factory built or at the site.
And now, talking about regulations, I know that there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, I can just go buy a tiny home and park it in my backyard and call it an Airbnb. But we kind of discussed navigating the regulations for a primer on Appendix Q, which I think that I'm understanding correctly. It's a building codes and certification process for tiny houses and ADUs. Do you have any tips for homeowners that you can talk about that are seeking permits? And I think that you also mentioned that there's a petition that people can sign as well to get these regulations changed. So can you talk about the permitting process a little bit?
Yeah, it's a long history and it's a little bit complicated or complex, but Appendix Q was started 2016, 2015 by a group of tiny house pioneers and code experts to try to permit tiny homes, 400 square foot dwellings on a foundation. And that's the
Mhm.
tricky part. The International Residential Code, the IRC, is their jurisdiction is to allow permanent based dwellings on a permanent foundation. So tiny homes typically are on a chassis or a trailer. So that made it really complicated to try to get that passed under the Appendix Q for the IRC. So
Okay.
they did pass it, but only if it's on a permanent foundation, like a
Mhm.
concrete masonry block unit or something affixed to the ground permanently. So
Mhm.
this next process, it's now called Appendix BB, and there's a group of people. Macy Miller is one of the people who's spearheading this effort, where we will be presenting in front of the IRC in October, in a week actually, to try
Oh,
to propose it as a movable tiny house so that it doesn't have to be fixed permanently on the ground. It could be
mhm.
anchored like a manufactured home,
Uh-huh.
so that will allow people still keep the wheels in the trailer, because
Uh-huh.
before with Appendix Q, they couldn't. They had to affix it on a permanent foundation. But what Appendix Q did was it allowed for a lot of benefits that a traditional house can't do with a
Mhm.
regular permit. For instance, the loft, you typically need to have a minimum height, standing height, for a sleeping loft to be permitted. And so, given the height restrictions of 13 and a half feet for a trailer to go down the road, you couldn't
Mhm.
have a 7'6" high loft. So they allowed 4 foot, I think, minimum loft for a sleeping loft. So that was allowed.
Okay.
Another thing was stairs are usually required for lofts and, beyond the first level. So they allowed not just stairs because it takes up a lot of room, minimum
Mhm.
3 feet. So they allowed it to have a ladder that had minimum structural components that allowed you to get from the first level to the loft. So that allowed you to just have a minimal square footage so that you can maintain a whole living space within 140 square feet if needed. So that's what Appendix Q allowed. But then the trailer was never really addressed because it was a big item to have to solve at that time. So now that's what we're trying to do with Appendix BB. So sorry
Okay.
for that long explanation. It's
No, I mean, we need to know that, right? So, what about this petition? Remember
Yes.
you mentioned a petition, so people can go online and we can absolutely drop the link below where people can click on it and sign the petition to get
Yes.
this
It's
signed.
really easy. It explains what the Appendix BB is about, which is an extension of Appendix B or Appendix Q. And so
Okay.
you can read through it, links with even more details under the IRC code, but it
Okay.
takes 1 minute to sign it, and it helps to get all the signatures in place before October 22nd, which is when the
Okay.
hearing will be, because we will present it to the committee members on October
Okay.
22nd. So thank you, Tammie, for mentioning that.
Yeah, so remember, guys, go down and click on the link below and make sure that you click on the petition, because if you have an aging parent, or if you want to create generational wealth instead of trying to help your kids buy a house, which is insane right now in California, or instead of sticking your parents in a facility, you can there are programs out there, especially in California, where you can have your family member get paid from California to take care of your aging parent. So if you have a separate space for them, then you get to be with grandma and grandpa, you get to take care of them, they get to be part of the family. And this petition for Appendix BB for the IRC codes for permits is really, really important, especially when kids are just now getting out of college, they can't afford their own house. What can they do? Well, they can build an ADU behind mom and dad's house so they can still have that protection. You can also rent it out as an Airbnb. You can, have it for family who are out of town. You can rent it out to,
The residents, in
yeah.
your town, because Airbnb is something that is sensitive because it's for tourism
Mhm.
and not really supporting the permanent residents. So there's so many flexible things that you could do if this code passes, because it's not restricted just to the ADUs. It can either
Mhm.
be a single family home. So it's a
Wow.
lot it's a lot more flexibility, if because a
Mhm.
lot of right now, you had a interview with Dan Fitzpatrick a few weeks
Mhm.
ago.
Yep.
So he pioneered the whole effort of
Mhm.
creating municipal codes for tiny houses on wheels, movable tiny homes,
Yes.
as an ADU. So that was great. And that's what's happening in a lot of places in California. But
Mhm.
this IRC proposal for tiny houses on a foundation or on wheels allows it to be a single family home. It could be an ADU. It could be an accessory structure. So it's a lot
Mhm.
more flexible in its use.
That's awesome. So, I want to talk to you about sustainability meets affordability, balancing quality materials, energy efficient, and cost to make eco-friendly housing accessible to more people, including the B Corp principles and partnerships with 1% for the planet. So, what about more sustainable materials? Is that something that could impact the sustainability of our communities as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to know that what you're doing is sustainable. 1% for the planet is an effort to help like grassroots organizations, nonprofits do their work, being supported by for profit businesses like me.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I would donate a certain, like at least 1% of my profits to like Ojai Valley Land Conservancy to continue their work to keep open spaces intact to be enjoyed by the public. So I I'm a member of 1% for the Planet and the B Corp. And I'm also partnered with the Honnold Foundation, who basically works with marginalized communities all over the world, like in Africa and Philippines and lots of different countries all over the they're marginalized. It's harder for them to, so they empower those communities to have solar panels in their communities. So I donate to them because it's a social impact, not just an environmental impact. So the B certification allows organizations to have a rigorous process to make sure that their operations are aligned with their mission towards sustainability and social justice. So that's another part of my business. But in terms of your question with sustainable materials and tiny houses in general, it's affordable by design and sustainable by design, simply because you're minimizing your footprint to a very minimal amount.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you would have more savings in terms of utilities, like what you mentioned, as well
Right.
as, your rent or your mortgage, and the use of your materials. When I built my tiny house, I was surprised how much waste I generated, even in my tiny square footage. I was surprised the construction, like the lumber and things that I didn't use just because
Mm-hmm.
of leftovers, because I didn't have the perfect size.
Right.
So if you imagine that in the larger context of a traditional house, the waste generated and the utilities, the electrical, our
Property
carbon
tax.
footprint, the property tax, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really surprising once you actually go through the process.
Well, I wanted to kind of touch on your recognition and advocacy. I mean, you were named one of the global 100 most influential Filipina women and speaking at Yale University on social entrepreneurship. So, can you talk about what that was like?
I felt like I was going through imposter syndrome. Are you sure you're wanting to talk to me? Yeah, it was a true honor, and I just was, you know, blown my mind that they included me in their list. I think both of those events happened in 2015.
Uh-huh.
So I finished my tiny house in 2013, and it got a lot of media attention. And so I think they found me through that, through the different publications. But the women's organization with the Filipino women was a true honor, because that was also an international award for very accomplished Filipino women all over the world, and to gather with them. It was in San Francisco, and many flew from all over the world to meet and just be inspired by all these incredible women. So that was a big treat. That was
Wow, that's
really inspiring.
congratulations on
Thank
that.
you
I know
so much.
been a while, but I mean that impact still happens, right? It's like part of your legacy.
Yes, and they have it every year. They try to find women all over the world who have made an impact. Of course, Filipino women, and they continue to raise and just promote all these incredible, accomplished women. And so I'm just super, just honored to be part of their company.
So, what do you think is the future outlook on tiny homes, ADU, sustainable design? Can you help solve housing shortages or support climate resilience and inspire a cultural shift towards simpler living? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
I think there's a lot of people in the movement who are doing that. I'm going to be meeting a number of them at the conference in October for this tiny house code. And a lot of it is the legislation, like we talked about, because if we're allowed to have alternative housing options, it kind of starts with the legislation, because a lot of people are doing it under the radar
Right.
because they know that they can't. And we need to have more flexible codes to allow for alternatives, because the single family home that are like 3,000 square feet on a huge lot just doesn't work anymore.
Right.
The middle class is shrinking, while the more affluent top 1% is growing. So there's no middle class anymore. And
Yes.
and there's not a nuclear family as much as it was, decades ago. It's a lot of
Right.
singles and couples, and not necessarily a family unit. Maybe there's two women wanting to live together because their partners have passed away and they just want to live with their friends.
Right.
A lot of women I know want to live together in their retirement years and just share
Yeah.
property, but they can't because multiple dwelling units are not allowed in a single family residential zone.
Hmm.
So that's my kind of vision for the future, is having communities in small dwellings share a parcel of land so that they can share not just the land but the resources it takes to maintain and pay for a
Hmm.
property. Instead of buying your own washing machine or even car or garden tools and even books, you can just share everything instead of buying individual things. And you can kind of watch each other. If
Hmm.
somebody wants to go travel, they can, feel at peace without having to worry about someone to take care of their pet or, just
Right. Or make sure the garden doesn't die.
exactly. Just water the plants. Just take the mail. Just, upkeep. So, and I think one of the big aspects is connectivity so that
Mhm.
you're able to, have people live with you instead of so disconnected in a community that has big walls around the perimeter of the property where you don't even see your neighbor. And I think that's really important now with technology kind of taking over our lives and the screen time.
Yeah, I think that the movement for 2025 has been kind of people reconnecting. There's not so much meetings on email or meetings on the phone or texting. There's more Zoom calls now. There's more face-to-face time, maybe on a computer. And you're right, there is this sense of community where not as many people are having families. They might just enter into a partnership and be together until whenever. And having those communities of friends. And I've noticed that there's more and more women who
Mhm,
are creating these communities for either other women or just in general. And the men are as well. But they think there's also an awareness that there are homeless communities that are being built up as well. I mean, I live in
mhm,
Sacramento and we already have, I think, two tiny house villages for the homeless. And they're getting ready to build another one that's a lot bigger. So, and the other thing that's becoming, I think, a movement and a lot of chatter is kids who are in foster care that age out of the system at 18. Where do they go? They don't have any place to go. There's no transition. So,
mhm,
there's, I think that there's a buzz around that as well, where they have like transitional housing between their aging out and maybe 24. So, having these small communities pop up for foster kids or the homeless or just
mhm.
affordable housing in general. Like you said, the middle class is kind of deteriorating
Disappearing.
where, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Well,
But
also, the communities are a great idea. I mean, those tiny homes in one, but those are generally like RV parks or mobile home parks. You can't do that in a single family parcel.
no,
You're only
no.
allowed to, a single family home and an ADU, maybe two, a junior ADU and an ADU. So maybe three maximum. But
Mhm.
what I'm thinking of is multiple, maybe not 20, maybe five, maybe four, where you don't have to be a developer because I don't necessarily want to live in a 20 unit. community. I just want to live in a small, one parcel with
Yes.
maybe four, at the
Yeah.
most five different, units. So I think that, and that empowers homeowners. They don't have to be a
Yes.
developer. A homeowner can just have multiple small units on their property. And I think there's a huge need if that, that option was opened up to do it legally.
Yeah, and also to change renters into homeowners. I
Mhm,
mean,
yeah, like,
yeah, I was born and raised in LA, and I rented apartments, and all you had to do was come up with your first and last month's rent and maybe a security deposit. In Northern California, you have to make 3 times the amount of rent. Well,
mhm,
if rent is $2,000 a month, you're supposed to be making 6 grand
6,000.
a month. And
Mhm,
it's like it's easier to qualify for a home
mhm,
than it is for an
yeah,
apartment.
exactly.
And people don't realize that, yeah, homeownership is can be expensive, but it's better than renting. So moving those renters into just a small property that's manageable, and
Mhm.
then they can grow from that if they want. So
Exactly. I mean, I just bought property recently, and that wouldn't have been feasible without my tiny house because I was slowly able to save money to actually buy property. So
mhm,
now that I bought this property, it takes so much money to just develop with utilities and coming up with the finances to build a permanent foundation based home. That's a huge undertaking. But if and there's I'm proposing an ADU on the lower level, like an attached ADU and the single family home on top, so I could easily get a renter for
yeah,
that. But if somebody like you or just a friend is willing to commit to it and say I'm going to rent it out and I'm willing to pay upfront, the rent so that you can actually build it, you
uh-huh,
know I mean, to be able to do that is a huge benefit for me, but that,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. I mean, there's so many housing solutions and opportunities available now that we didn't have even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, yeah, that's awesome. So, as you can see with Vina, tiny homes aren't just about living in a smaller space. They're about reimagining our relationship and resources, community, and the environment. Vina's journey from corporate architect to social entrepreneur underscores the power of aligning design with personal values, like we were talking about with the loft and the tiny spaces. So whether you're considering a tiny home, looking to add an ADU, or simply seeking inspiration to live more sustainably, her story offers practical insights and encourages us all to think big by living smaller. I want to thank the listeners of the Home Expo podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share, do all the things. To learn more about Vina's work, visit Soul House Design and check out our other episodes for more expert tips on building the home of your dreams. And again, Vina is very much into the IRC. She's going to present new regulations in a couple of weeks, and we would love for you to sign the petition to get more regulations available in your area. And we're so grateful, Vina. Thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful to speak with you. And all of her links will be down at the bottom. And thanks again, Vina, for showing up and our listeners. We'll see you next time at the Home Expo podcast. Bye.
thank you, Tammy. Bye bye.